Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one, we have some information about possible balance updates coming to the game, as well as we're going to do a little bit of speculating what changes might be in store to kind of knock the two best decks in the format down a peg so that there can be a bit more variety and enjoyment of the new season. So starting out, we have a message here from Steven. Been asking a lot about balance updates, as have many other people in the community, and this is the response we got. We have balance updates in the works. We ran into some issues with our ability to OTA them the past few weeks. So what is OTA? OTA stands for over the air. This is basically just a fancy term for meaning they can deploy balance changes without a dedicated patch. We saw this happen during the last season when Surfer and Zabu missed the initial window for them locking in the patch. They were still able to adjust those cards on the fly without having to wait for a whole new patch cycle, which due to various reasons can sometimes take longer than is desired for fixing unhealthy metagames. So, I mean, this is good to know because, you know, I have found it very surprising that they haven't viewed the current state of the format and the game as warranting these kind of over-the-air updates or changes, but apparently that isn't really the case. They don't even have the option to do that right now, which is kind of concerning because, you know, they did, you know, make a whole point that this was a good thing they added to the game and they're happy that they can do this when needed. Now it feels like it's needed and they can't do it, so that kind of sucks. But at least we know. Then he says, this happens every meta though. Some folks love it, some hate it. We have to find the right cadence to drop balance updates that isn't too frequent for most players, but keeps the more engaged players on their toes. Now, obviously, it is a tricky thing to find the right cadence. Some games do it really wrong, and it is very damaging to the game. However, I really don't think the comment about this happens every meta is true. You don't have everybody cheating out absurd 6-drops every meta. I think this Thanos meta is probably one of, if not the most warped meta we've seen since release, and it just feels really, really bad. I mean, go ask any player, any streamer, how they're feeling about the game right now, and you're not going to see a very positive response. So it's really unfortunate that they're not able to get out a kind of emergency fix right now, and unfortunately, because of that, and because of this response, we kind of have an idea of when the next patch might be, and it seems like, I mean, we could be wrong, this is my speculation, it seems like we might not get it until the Variant Rush update starts, which is the 21st of March. So that is 12 days from now, just under 2 weeks. We might have another almost 2 weeks of this meta, and that would mean like half of this season was just lost to this nonsense 2-deck meta. So they really have to do something to be able to actually, you know, patch their game at a more timely rate, because it really just feels pretty unacceptable. I mean, I think February was a great season. There was a lot of variety in the decks being played. I actually really enjoyed playing the game a lot in February, but as February started to close and we got into March, the Thanos deck got a lot more refined, and then that started really limiting the meta, mainly because of Lockjaw and Leech, who we'll talk about in a minute. And then Shuri. Shuri's been a top dog forever, and is one of the few decks that can kind of reasonably compete with Thanos, mainly because it is just very hard to interact with a lot of the time. So I think this is pretty unfortunate. You know, you're probably going to be seeing a lot more varied content from me in terms of videos and whatnot, because if this meta isn't changing for the next week and a half, 2 weeks, there's not going to be as much gameplay, because it is just not really enjoyable, and there's not really anything to innovate. Everything just gets crushed by these top 2 decks. You play Thanos, you play Shuri, or you play Cube Donation Simulator. So yeah, kind of sucks. I mean, at least we have some information now, but I think it's really unfortunate that being able to do a kind of emergency fix seems to be off the table right now due to technical issues. Then another question here from the official Discord asking about buffs to weaker characters such as Quake and Baron Mordo. So Glenn says, stay tuned, we will have announcements in the vein coming in the coming months. So basically, I think what he's saying here is you know, over the next few months, we're probably going to be seeing them bumping up more underperforming characters. We did get some of that in the recent balance patch on the 21st of February, where things like Spider-Woman and Sandman and Dagger got buffs. I really like seeing buffs to underperforming characters. I think you want to make more of your characters playable than not playable, and that also adds just to the variety you can have in building different decks and different strategies. So hopefully we won't have to wait super long to see more buffs to underperforming cards. Next up, I wanted to make some predictions. It's always fun to kind of try and make predictions to see, you know, what do we expect them to actually do when it comes time to balance the game, and if we end up being right or not right. So right now, like I mentioned, top 2 decks, Thanos and Shuri. So how do you kind of knock those decks down a peg to where they're still playable, but they aren't dominating the format to where people feel shoehorned into playing those 2 decks if they want to climb higher up on the ladder? And I think there are some pretty simple options for this. We'll start with Thanos here. So Thanos, funnily enough, I don't think the problem is actually necessarily Thanos or even a lot of the stones themselves. Though I do think it is possible if they did adjust a stone, it would probably be the move stone, as that one causes some very crazy things to happen, in particular with this version of the deck. I know a lot of people have had the suggestion of making the Quinjet interaction not work with the Thanos stones, but I think that's kind of just a band-aid and doesn't actually fix the problem, which is this deck being able to cheat out a ridiculous amount of stuff for very little cost, and being able to cheat out Leech, one of the cards we'll talk about in a minute here, that basically just shuts off all the cards that normally would be able to counter a deck like this. So starting out, I don't think they really need to change the Quinjet interaction. I think it actually punishes more fun and fair versions of Thanos, like the Thanos Zoo decks. You're not really seeing people play those, because if you're playing Thanos and you want to win, you might as well play the Lockjaw version. But I've played a lot of Thanos Zoo. It's a deck I really like, and I think it'd be a shame if that deck got caught in the crosshairs of trying to nerf Thanos when there's much more effective ways to kind of tone down the most powerful and popular Thanos deck. So how do we actually tune the deck down? Well, there are 2 cards here that I think are on the table for adjustments. First of which is Lockjaw. So Lockjaw, you know, in other card games, we've seen this effect before, and pretty universally, it has always been a very overpowered effect. It wasn't necessarily super overpowered in Snap to begin with, though it was very powerful, as we saw with some of the Thor Lockjaw stuff. But I do think with the addition of the stones, Lockjaw is just a bit too ridiculous now, especially with the move stone being able to just pull it out of the lane, and then you can just rethrow your stones into the Lockjaw, get more big stuff. Just kind of absurd. It cheats more mana than like we've ever seen in this game, and it's just not very balanced. In other games such as Magic and Hearthstone, we've seen similar cards like this in Tinker and Barnes, and both those cards respectively were very, very broken in those games. It's just a very dangerous level of mana cheating, and I think if you want to tone down the Thanos deck, as well as kind of make things a little bit safer for other future cheap cards you introduce to the game, or future big payoffs that can be cheated out via Lockjaw, I think the smart move here is to put Lockjaw to a 4-cost card. That way you can still cheat a bunch of stuff out, but it's happening significantly later in the game, and gives your opponent a bit more time to respond to it before they have to worry about the big things coming out, or before they have to worry about Leech popping out and ruining their day. Speaking of Leech, that is the other card I think we will be seeing getting some adjustments. Leech is a really, really feels bad card, and the thing about Leech was we kind of memed on him back in beta as being one of the worst cards in the game. And the reason for that is because Leech was kind of a huge tempo loss. Leech is only 3 power for a 5 cost, but he does have a very powerful effect. But the thing is, a lot of the times in Thanos, you're not paying 5 mana for Leech. Or if you are paying 5 mana for Leech, you're getting rid of the tiny body and getting it replaced with something that is often much, much bigger, which mitigates the tempo loss. So there are a lot of different ways people have suggested changing Leech. It's really hard to predict for sure, Some ideas that I've heard that I have liked are having it work similar to Nakia, where it only hits the left 2 or the left 3 cards of your hand, so it doesn't hit the whole hand. That would be nice. The big problem with Leech is there's no real effective way to play around this card. How it used to work was if you were ahead in the game, you didn't really mind getting leeched a whole ton. But now it doesn't really matter if you're ahead because they can play the Leech while still developing a very powerful board, or they just get it for free out of the Lockjaw. Also, Leech being able to come down on turn 4 via the Time Stone ramping on turn 3 is also just another way where they can kind of mitigate that tempo loss, as it is much more efficient to play a card that powerful on turn 4 rather than turn 5. So I think you could definitely change it in that way. Another interesting change that could happen to Leech is it only turns off your opponent's card effects for 1 turn. So that way, if Leech gets cheated out early, it only shuts them off for the following turn rather than the rest of the game. Or another change I've seen suggested is kind of have it be a reverse 0, where the next card your opponent plays has its effect removed. Though I guess it'd be a little different than 0, because you'd have to have the whole hand leeched, and then after playing the first card, the rest of them kind of work like normal. That's another possibility. There are a lot of different things you can do to this card, but I do think it's creating a lot of feel-bad experiences, and on top of that, Leech is, I think, the biggest reason, next to Lockjaw, that the Thanos deck is so hard to deal with, because a lot of the decks that could be effective at dealing with Thanos by blowing up their big things or blowing up their stones, all their cards just get leeched before they have the opportunity to be able to interact with the Thanos deck. So those are my thoughts on how Thanos might get changed a bit. Again, I don't think they're actually going to change Thanos himself, because I don't think there's really anything particularly wrong with him or the stones necessarily. It's just some of the other powerful cards that enable the deck to do really degenerate things. Next up is Shuri. So Shuri is an interesting deck, interesting card. A lot of people have been calling for nerfs for this card for a while now, and I've always been in the camp that it's really hard to nerf Shuri in an effective way where she is still an interesting and playable card. You also have to keep in mind interactions like the Black Panther combo, kind of like Devil Dinosaur, where they don't necessarily want to remove the fact that, you know, she's a 4 cost, so you can curve her into Black Panther. It's kind of a lore win, and they like those cool lore relevant interactions. So I don't think they want to get rid of that, and I don't think they really should have to. Shuri's a powerful card, but she sees play in a wide variety of decks, and I really do think it is only the dedicated 0 Shuri Red Skull deck that she's proving to be a bit more of a problem in. So I think there are 2 different ways you could go about adjusting this deck while still keeping it intact. The first one is if they wanted to change Shuri, I think there is one option that I've kind of, for a while, I wasn't sure how you change Shuri. A lot of people say send her to 5. I think if you send Shuri to 5, the card is dead, doesn't see play. I generally don't really like removing cards from the game. I like having more cards to play with, and it would also kill Shuri off in a bunch of archetypes that she's really not that oppressive in. So how would I change Shuri? I think an interesting way that you could change Shuri is to make it so the next card you play in this lane gets its power doubled. So what does this change really enable? Well, it means you can't play Shuri on one lane and then play your really big, huge thing in a Cosmo lane. You have to stick it wherever you stuck the Shuri. Now, you could still play it in an armor lane and still have it protected from Shang-Chi, and I think that's totally fine. I think one of the reasons the Shuri deck is so successful right now is Cosmo makes it really, really hard to interact with their big thing, and then Cosmo also shuts down your ability to pull their second copy of the big thing into their other big thing lane so that they only win one lane. Cosmo is just really, really ridiculous at protecting that deck's game plan, and I don't think you really need to make a change to Cosmo, because Cosmo is a very important card to have around for other strategies. But I do think being able to make the Shuri player have to commit their big thing to wherever they played the Shuri would go a long way to enabling counterplay for the deck without actually deleting it. The other option, if they do not want to change Shuri herself, is really just Red Skull. I think a big part of the reason why the Shuri deck is so popular and powerful is because 30 power is a really huge number. I mean, think about it. Think about the restriction we have on something like Infinite or Thanos, and those are only 20, 21 power when they're fully juiced up. So the fact that you're getting 10 more power than that for a relatively minuscule downside is just a bit ridiculous. And again, it wouldn't be so bad if you could more easily interact with the Red Skull, but most of the time you just can't because of the other cards they play. So how would Red Skull be changed in order to make this deck a bit more balanced? Well, you basically just shrink the stats on it a bit. Maybe you shrink the cost along with it down to 4, but you basically would turn its ongoing ability. So basically for Red Skull, what I think they would do if that was the card they wanted to adjust is make it so it only buffs opponents' units by +1/+1 instead of +2/+2, but you also shrink down the power to say 10 power or 11 power. Now, maybe this also warrants it going down in mana cost from 5 to 4, and I think that could be reasonable, kind of have it be a bit of a different take on Typhoid Mary, where it's buffing the opponent's stuff instead of shrinking your own stuff. But I think that really is one of the bigger problems with the Shuri deck. I think without Red Skull in its current form, the Shuri deck gets worse enough to where other decks can more reasonably compete with it. It'll still be powerful, but it won't be so absolutely meta-defining as it is right now. So those are my thoughts on how they might change some of these cards to really knock these decks down a peg without fully eradicating them, and just kind of opening up the meta so we can actually enjoy messing around with the new Season Pass card Nimrod, as well as just other fun and interesting strategies. Like I said before, I really did enjoy experimenting with the meta in February, and until these decks got really refined and overly popular, I felt the meta was in a pretty good place. But this is bound to happen in card games sometimes. The important thing is that they're able to appropriately respond and kind of fix this problem, because right now, most of the people I talk to don't feel there's a good reason to try and climb or try and stream, because the experience is just a Thanos and Shuri simulator, and it's just not very fun. We still don't know when the next patch will be hitting the game. That's kind of up in the air. My guess, my prediction on this is I think we are going to have to wait until the patch that brings in the variant rush. If you remember back in the Winter Wonderland event, or Winterverse event, whatever it was, where they did their first variant rush, that actually required a patch to make it go live and also required a patch to remove it, and that was actually the patch that got delayed, so we had a little bit of extra time to collect those variants. So unfortunately, I think we are going to be waiting for the 21st for this patch to drop. I really hope I'm wrong about that, but given the comments we got today, I think that seems to be the most likely case scenario, which is really a shame because it means essentially half of this season will have been ruined by Thanos and Shuri, which really sucks. I think I can count on one hand the amount of times I have ran into people playing Nimrod this season. I saw someone today who's been playing since the season started and just saw someone play Nimrod for the first time. So it's really not a great place to be right now. But that is going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think there are different ways they should adjust these cards? What would you like to see? Let me know in the comments, but that is going to wrap it up for this one. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.